Midway through the 2010s, Nintendo was at a crossroads. 2011 Skyward Sword was a disappointing entry on an ancient Wii console, and the Wii U was shaping up to be more confusing than exciting. Released in November of 2012, the Wii U suffered one of the worst console launches in Nintendo history. The lineup was plagued with average ports of old AAA games, disappointing third-party titles, and new Super Mario Bros. U. Media reaction was poor, and while the system did well over those first few weeks, nobody seemed to really care. Anecdotally, I didn't know a single person who owned a Wii U at launch, and if they did, they weren't talking it up. Despite the new hardware, Nintendo felt like a company on the road to irrelevance. That is until a Nintendo Direct in January of 2013 teased a brand new game with a familiar face.
Finally comes the last topic for today. We are going to discuss our plans for The Legend of Zelda series on Wii U. Please allow Eiji Aonuma, the producer of Zelda, to explain.
Hello everybody, watching Nintendo Direct. I'm Eiji Aonuma, the producer of The Legend of Zelda. ゼルダの25周年を皆さんと一緒にお祝いさせていただいたのは
In a video that felt more like a corporate slideshow than a game reveal, Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma discussed his vision for a new Zelda game for the Wii U. The Nintendo legend talked about rethinking the conventions of the franchise, removing restrictions, opening up Skyward's linear structure, and linking Wind Waker's HD remake to this new game's visual goals. No gameplay, no screenshots, but the timing seemed perfect. Zelda was coming to the Wii U at a point where it was desperately needed. Or was it? Every year we'd get another drip of information. At E3 2014, Nintendo released a trailer featuring a small 30-second gameplay clip at the end. During the 2014 Game Awards, Nintendo published a video featuring Aonuma and Shigeru Miyamoto playing an early build of the title. What we saw was interesting, and the world looked massive and pretty cool, but we were hungry for the new promised Zelda, the Wii U's vaunted killer app. But it never came. 2015 rolled by, and despite strong sales of Super Mario Maker, Splatoon, and the Skylanders phenomenon, the Wii U sunk to the bottom of the sea both on the balance sheet and the public consciousness. People began asking, will Nintendo go the way of Sega and stop selling hardware altogether? Are we going to see the next Mario game on the PS4? Until finally, this happened in the summer of 2016 during the E3 conference.
Open your eyes.
Everything was revealed. There was a trailer, a half-hour live gameplay demo from Treehouse Live on the showroom floor, messages from Aonuma, and honest to goodness, this game is for real media blitz that looked incredible. It was epic, nostalgic, and uniquely Zelda. And we finally had a name to attach to the dream: Breath of the Wild. But on the Wii U? The world had largely moved on from Nintendo's tablet-like disaster. Would the power of the Triforce be enough to give the Wii U one last gasp of relevance? Fast forward 4 months, and on October 20th, 2016, we got our answer. Kinda. With white denim's ha 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 yeah playing in the background, we got our first look at Nintendo's newest handheld console hybrid, cleverly named the Switch. Over the course of 200 minutes, the video showcased everything that was going to make the system special. Detachable controllers, jumping from TV play to handheld, couch co-op in places where there was no couch, And what was the first game on display during this unprecedented reveal that would eventually amass 50 million views on YouTube? That's right, Breath of the Wild. When the Switch launched on March 3rd, 2017, Breath of the Wild was released alongside it on both the new console and the Wii U. But nobody cared about that weird tablet thing that had its shot. Link's newest adventure was the Switch's killer app, and quite frankly, the only game anyone wants to play day one. And it lived up to the hype in every way imaginable. An enormous world full of discoveries to unearth, the game propelled Nintendo's new console to immediate success. It did for the Switch what Super Mario World did for the SNES, and what Wii Sports did for the Wii. Turn a video game console release into a worldwide phenomenon. On this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, we take one final dive into the world of Hyrule to explore why this Wii U exclusive turned Switch system seller has irrevocably changed the direction of the franchise and make some dreamy guesses on where we go from here. Time to climb the nearest cliff face, grab our paraglider, and soar into a world of adventures unknown as we tackle The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and beyond. Starting us off on the Great Plateau, Jim from Drink a Beer, Play a Game tells us some really cool stories about his experience with Zelda as a whole and Breath of the Wild. Then Dan from Retro Logic talks about his experiences with the game. Julian from Nerds Without Pants discusses how this title actually made him a kinda sorta Zelda fan. And then finally, Seth from the All In podcast shares his first impressions. Breath of the Wild, are you a fan or?
I actually really do like it. I want to go back and beat it, but I have so much I have to play right now that I know I don't have the time for it, but I'm going to get it for the Switch this time, obviously. And I do want to really play through it again because I really liked it. I put like 20 hours in. I still at that point barely touched any of the main like actual dungeons or sacred beasts at all.
Right.
I was still just exploring the world and doing all the little mini dungeons.
Yep. I as someone who really enjoys like Fallout and games like that, really drop you in the middle of a place and make you figure it out and just let you explore. Breath of the Wild is probably my favorite Zelda game. And I've played almost all of them at this point, at least the main ones. And man, oh man, because there will be a Breath of the Wild episode where I just talk lots of sugar about that game. But yeah, I think you said 20 hours, and my first thought was, oh, child. Oh, child. I got 100 hours in, and that's when I said to myself, time to finish this game. Because I don't feel like you are done with Breath of the Wild. You don't really finish it unless you get every little, whatever it is, Deku nut thing, whatever it was called, or 900 or so things you got to collect and all this
Korok
stuff,
seeds and all that, yeah.
That's Korok seeds, thank you. There's no chance for that. But, yeah, man, I adore Breath of the Wild. I played Breath of the Wild for the first time, I guess now it'll be almost 2 years ago. My daughter was just born.
Yeah. And
I was taking because how with kids, it's every 2.5 hours, 3 hours, the kid's waking up, she's got to eat, the whole thing. So I was doing the 12:30 shift, so I was doing the 12:30 shift because
been there.
It's because it's easier for me to stay up till 12:30 than it is for me to wake up at 3. Like once I'm out, I'm out. So that's just how my wife and I figured it out. So I remember sitting there, it was one of the first nights, and I was sitting there and I had the Switch next to me, and I'm like, what? I bought Breath of the Wild. This might be a really good opportunity for me to just knock out some Breath of the Wild because my wife is sleeping. She's asleep, my son's asleep, and I had like these 3-hour stretches where I just tore through Breath of the Wild, and it really did get me through those long nights of feedings and such. So, and it's amazing. And after that, I did a Fallout New Vegas run, and I get, like you said, frustrated. I can't climb this rock. It's right in front of me. Stop, Bethesda.
Right. Exactly.
Let me climb this rock. It was again, obviously it's hard. You can't compare those two games, but that energy was there. It was like, man, I just went through a place where I can just climb everything so long as stamina allows. And here I am. I can't get over this little chasm.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that Breath of the Wild did that kind of changed the game a little bit was there's no empty pockets. Like every hill you go over leads to something. Whether it's a Korok seed or a shrine or just a big enemy, there's something there, or a secret chest, or there's something there always. And a lot of open world games prior to Breath of the Wild were very big and impressive, but also very kind of empty. Didn't feel very lived in.
Exactly, and I've said this a bunch of times in previous Breath of the Wild conversations, and I'll just say it again. There is nothing more priceless in a game, like really like a priceless artifact, than being able to point to a spot in the distance and not only know you can get there, but also know that either over there or on the way, something cool is bound to be there. Like something cool is going to be there. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get sidetracked because you just found, shield sledding,
Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Man. Like you just find this awesome stuff and you're like, oh man. And you never get to that point because you've now found 5 cool things.
And it's crazy. Like I think by the time I like finally stopped playing Breath of the Wild, I was like over 200 hours. And one of the last things I discovered, I don't know how I missed this, was there's this Colosseum like right by the Great Plateau.
Yeah.
And I totally just never noticed it, never saw it was there, never saw it on the map. And so like it was kind of serendipitous. Like the very last thing I do in Breath of the Wild was enter this Colosseum and get my butt handed to me.
Yeah.
By
Is
Lionels.
that the one with all the Lionels? Yeah. And at the very bottom, there's like the King Lionel or something.
Yeah. And I don't know how I missed that, man. It's right there when you leave. But, I pointed my direction in the split mountain and I walked and I didn't look back.
Okay.
And Ocarina of Time, actually, I think, in hindsight, was the beginning of me realizing I'm not a big Zelda guy.
Yeah, fair.
I think, let me be clear. That game is seminal. It is one of the most important games of like leading into the modern era. But I think one of the problems of it being so seminal is that then Nintendo just kept on doing that. They're like, let's just let this ride. And it just felt like every time there was a new Zelda game, I would buy it, I would play it for a few hours, and I would say, oh, I don't love this. But then I would do it again.
Yeah.
And again. Up until Breath of the Wild, where I didn't love it, but I liked it enough to finish it. Because it had enough like new stuff and interesting stuff where I was like, this is really cool. This part sucks. This is really cool. This part sucks. But this is really cool. I just kept going back and forth like that the whole time I was playing it. But it kept me going for the whole like 40 or 50 hours that I played it.
Breath of the Wild, I'm working on that episode right now as we speak and kind of culminating things. And I look through my list like, I have no Seth clips. This can't be. So Breath of the Wild, I'm going to, obviously you played it recently because it was released relatively recently. So it's not a nostalgic thing. This is kind of more about your experience with it. How did you feel when you first kind of got dropped into, the Great Plateau and set off on your adventure? What was kind of your first take of it?
Oh my gosh. Breath of the Wild, we as Nintendo fans were sort of starving when Breath of the Wild came out, right? We were at this place where it had been a long time since Skyward Sword, and we're actually right there again with Tears of the Kingdom, where it's been so many years since we've had something like this, and it really represents an interesting point in Nintendo's history, because they had, coming off of the Wii U, which, I mean, look, I love the Wii U for what it is, but there's never been a bleaker moment, in my history with Nintendo. Just no games, like we got some good stuff on Wii U, but
sure,
we were lost in the desert for a long time with that system.
Yeah, we were.
To the point where like the sales were so dire that Iwata had to cut his own pay in order to, to at least symbolically keep the lights on.
Sure.
And so anyways, coming into the sort of Switch era of Nintendo, it had such a burst of energy, this exciting new idea. I picked it up at midnight, like night one, came home with Breath of the Wild. I'd blocked off a week from work. I had taken vacation time, and I remember just like being wholly unprepared for what that game was, which is something that would immediately, the second you walk out onto that open field and you just see the world laid bare in front of you and just the open possibility, it reminded me of when I was a kid. Again, my first memory just of being alive is playing Zelda. And when you experience that first Zelda game, when I experienced that as a kid on the NES with my Uncle Aaron, and like realizing that the screen continues and realizing that, oh, the screen always continues, I can just keep going. That moment is recaptured in the opening of Breath of the Wild. Just possibility, just how big and open everything is, and not knowing a thing. Like, they had, showcased the year previous at E3, like a lot of people, that was their one like game at E3 that year. And so there was a lot of footage of Breath of the Wild out there,
right.
But nothing could have prepared me for just how free that entire experience was, and how, that's kind of where we're at now with Tears of the Kingdom, where it's like, no, you don't know anything, actually.
Yeah, you don't know what's coming, which is actually really cool and good. I remember having this conversation many, many months ago at this point now with somebody else, and they likened Breath of the Wild to almost being a spiritual successor to the very first Legend of Zelda.
Absolutely.
Kind of like what you're saying, where again, it's 30 years later, and we've gone full circle, and we're dropping you into the middle of this beautiful world and trusting you to figure it out. And I love when a game respects you. I love when games respect you to figure things out. And it doesn't happen very often in our modern day games, especially in the AAA space, where again, it feels like you're being pushed along a path. And again, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but for a game to just trust you and say, here, you're going to run in this direction, you're going to get hit by these laser beams, and you're going to die immediately.
Right.
And you just need to be okay with that. Just don't go that direction again. I think that's really, really cool. And I had the same feeling of this kind of exhilaration after the quick tutorializing, which every game has to do, of course. Once you're out in that open area, you just walk. There's one quest, beat Ganon. And that's the quest you have for the entire game. That's your quest. It's almost like a joke, it's not, it's almost like a bit where it's like, here's your quest guide. Here's one quest, beat Ganon.
Yeah,
and
defeat Bowser, save the princess, save the world, right? That's it.
Coming up next, Greg from the Level Zero podcast talks about Breath of the Wild's unusual onboarding. Blue Williams of Gamers Week podcast discussed the amazing freedom offered by Breath of the Wild. Seth once again returns to talk about some of his favorite moments of the game, and then Games with Coffee returns to the show to talk about building houses.
When, so many game franchises have been doing this, have been trying to iterate from the Zelda games that started that whole genre in the first place to Assassin's Creeds, which are look at this amazing iteration of an action adventure game where you are, going all these new and unique places and finding and collecting things and exploring. And then Zelda, and then, the team at Nintendo turned around and were like, okay, that's fine, but have you considered Breath of the Wild? And it's like, oh my gosh, how did they do it again? And what I love most is the onboarding of that game.
Oh,
it's
second to none.
There's no tutorial. There's no hand holding. There's no, hi, dum-dum, let me explain to you what a piece of wood is. It just hands it to you. And it does it in a very subtle and just, same way it did in the Super Nintendo, where you intuitive. It just, what to do as you're playing. Oh, okay, well, here's an apple. Oh, okay, here's an axe. Oh, I can swing this at the tree. Oh, I can collect wood. It just does it all naturally. It doesn't explain it to you. It doesn't consider you a dum-dum. I love it.
Breath of the Wild is the Zelda game that I envisioned in my head as a kid when I was playing the original Zelda. It's that realized, where it is this big open world, but you can actually just get lost in it, just go explore for hours upon hours upon hours. Who even cares about the story? I don't really. You just run around and make your own stories, have your own adventures, doing all kinds of ridiculous things. The things that they allow you to do in that game, making catapults and all kinds of riding bears. I mean, it's nuts. You can almost whatever you can think of, you can do. And I really, really like the freedom that Breath of the Wild gives you.
It is my favorite Zelda game, and I've played most of them. It's my favorite, and I have some gaping holes too. I've never played I keep saying Wind Waker. Is it Wind Waker?
Yeah.
Yes. I've never played Wind Waker. I've never played Majora's Mask. There's a couple others I haven't, but I played most of them. And Breath of the Wild is my favorite for exactly what you just said. It's fully realized. It sounds cheesy, but I think Breath of the Wild is what Miyamoto envisioned when he first thought of The Legend of Zelda.
Right, exactly.
Because he always said, roaming through the forest with his friends and going on adventures and discovering. And that's what Breath of the Wild does better than, I'd argue, any game to date. Like, I can't go back to games that prevent you from climbing something because of reason, because they didn't program it that way.
Right.
It's like, I can't get up this mountain. I've been playing Fallout New Vegas, and I'm like, I can't get up this little cliff. Why can't you just be like Breath of the Wild? Just let me climb.
Right.
Anywhere.
I mean, as long as you have the stamina on your bar.
Sure, which makes sense, right?
Which, I mean, and that's another great way to gate players in. Just make it taller, and then it makes sense without you having to break that immersion.
What would you say your favorite discovery of Breath of the Wild is? Did you ever have a moment where you're just walking along and you find something, and all of a sudden, 5 hours later, you're still there because something cool was there that you just didn't see coming?
Oh my gosh, like it just that kind of stuff just happens constantly in that game. Like that's what I love. And the comparison to the original NES Legend of Zelda game is apt because, like, by design, when they were designing that game, the initial like prototype for what would become Breath of the Wild just was a mod for the original Zelda game, where they had incorporated all of these things into that original game, and it was like, hey, like, what happens if I burn this bush, and how is the fire going to spread to the grass, and like things like this, and that would blossom into what became Breath of the Wild. It was a back to the drawing board kind of moment, and it's also the absolute antithesis of what people were saying about Skyward Sword, which is this is too slow, too handholdy, it takes too long to get into, blah, blah, blah. Well, this is like, cool, 5 minutes in, you've got the whole world in front of you. And I think that's a really interesting sort of response to what came before. And for me, like those little discoveries, it's little things. It's like the first time I realized that, oh, there's a little circle of rocks in the water. What happens if I throw something in those rocks and a Korok pops out? Yep. Like little tiny things, like when you realize that you're caught up in a thunderstorm and, oh snap, I've got a metal sword on my back, which is conducting the electricity.
It's so good. Yes.
I love that. I love that little stuff. It's like you're fighting a Wizrobe that's got like a fire rod, and all of a sudden the field that you're fighting in becomes just this scorched, wasteland because the fire has spread so much.
It's great. One of the most beautiful things a video game can do is say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
Breath of the Wild is nothing but a series of yeses. It's always saying, yes, you can. Wow, I can't get to the other side of that, but I have an axe. Will this game let me knock down a tree and walk across? Yes. Yes, it will. Awesome. Can I get on that horse? And yes, you can. And that's again why I love when the game can just say yes, and the designers are very intentional in giving you as many thumbs up as possible and saying, yeah, you can play with this. This is a giant playground, and we've thought of mostly everything. And of course, there's things you can't, right? It's not infinite possibilities. But they've built a system in such a way where, hey, can I get to the top of that mountain? And the answer is going to be yes. If you have enough stamina, if you have enough fruits to eat, yeah, you can get up there.
Another very tiny thing about Breath of the Wild that was actually low-key really impactful for me was the cooking.
The cooking's cool.
I love it so much for one very weird esoteric reason. And it's like, it's so cool and tactile. You just pick 5 items, put them into a little pot. But it's when Link is huddled around this hearth cooking and he's like, he's like humming along. And then it makes this happy little, and for the first time ever, he's happy. Like, this is a Link that is, I think, I can't really point to many situations aside from finding a rupee in a chest or, he's happy to be alive. He's happy to just be alive and cooking some sauteed mushrooms or whatever the heck I'm cooking. And I just love that. I love that so much.
I gotta say, the dancing pot, the dancing kettle is one of my favorite animations in, I don't want to say games, that'd be a bit of an exaggeration, but boy, oh boy, do I love that dancing kettle. And that ding-a-ding-ding, that just happy moment. Oh, pure it's dopamine. So good. It's all of that is just so beautifully tuned. I also love the idea. I have a couple of moments I remember of just kind of being kind of in awe of that emergent gameplay. Was, you mentioned in a thunderstorm, right? Mm-hmm. I had a situation where I had to kind of climb a cliff face, and you can't in the rain. Like you just can't. I don't care how good your boots are, you can't climb it. I had to sit and wait out the storm. Right. And I was sitting there thinking, and then as lightning's crashing, so now I'm naturally, I go by a tree, but of course you gotta be careful because the trees can catch on fire, lightning can hit a tree. So I'm just standing there in the rain, and I'm like, I just have to wait the storm out. And there's nothing I can do. I can't advance the time. I just have to wait this out. And I'm sitting there contemplating, and I'm playing most of this game, by the way, while I'm waiting between my daughter. She was just born when I started playing the game. And so Breath of the Wild was my, I had 3 hours between feedings and everyone's asleep. My wife's asleep. I played it during, when my daughter was, a week old. And I'm just going to sit here in the dark and quiet because everybody else in the house is asleep. It's 11:30, 12 o'clock, waiting for my daughter to wake up so I can feed her. And I'm just going to sit here and wait out this storm in a video game. I'm just going to sit here and wait. And it really struck me how cool that was. I really felt very connected to the world and connected to a moment when I had to just wait out a rainstorm. It was,
I love that.
I adore Breath of the Wild. Another moment that there's 2 others I have where you're walking along and it's in the wintry part of it, and all of a sudden you stumble across a little cottage, and it's the whole shield surfing, the shield snowboarding.
Yes.
Oh man, here I am. I was on the way to a quest or something. I'm going to sit here and spend 5 hours shield snowboarding. Here's what I'm going to do today. Again, all that emergent stuff was so great. And then the final one for me, and I'll let you chime in if you have some others, is I was basically at the 100-hour mark. And I said to myself, I'm like, all right, it's time to do what the quest said and beat Ganon. I am ready. I'm ready. So I go and I start going, and I hit a piece of the map I must not have hit before. And it's in the lower right-hand corner of the map, I believe. It's this little island town. It's got huts, and it's like a fishing village. Town that I had never seen before. I was almost about to go defeat Ganon and not even touch a central little hub area of the game. And again, that struck me as, oh my gosh, now I have another 10 hours in front of me. Because I got to do these side quests and meet these characters and what these people need. And again, it just struck me how a game is so confident in what it's doing. So Breath of the Wild for me is very confident. It's a very confident game because it's confident in saying, hey, if you miss this entire area, that's okay. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Not a big deal. Go feed Ganon, and maybe next time around you'll find it. Just really extraordinary. Were there moments like that for you? Again, cool little discovery. Like, what was like a discovery where you're like, I can't believe I came across this out of randomness?
Oh my God. Like when you, was it Eventide Island? Which is where you just kind of like wake up on this island with nothing. And you
yes.
Like,
oh my gosh.
That was insane. I was like, I can't believe this is happening right now. It's so cool. You have to like sneak through. I mean, you're completely naked. You've got nothing. And you have to like make your way through. There's like these Hinoxes that are like kind of guarding everything, and you have to You know, like I remember there's one that's sleeping and you have to kind of like gently get on like his belly, you know, and like there's just like that to me was just like, gosh, that was so cool. Like what a cool unexpected moment that was. There are, I think, 3 or 4 of these like giant labyrinths that are just like out in the middle of like the ocean from this like ancient race and stuff, these gigantic mazes that have like floating sky guardians all over them. You know, I just like there's so much stuff like that. When you see the dragons, you know, that will just periodically,
yes,
you know, glow and just like kind of streak through the night sky, and the music, like, you know, Breath of the Wild's got such an ambient soundtrack, but when the music swells and those dragons appear, like, it's
chilling.
so breathtaking. It's so
chilling.
Breathtaking. And if you can manage to get a shot off on them, you get a scale.
And they're
so
completely oblivious to you. They're just existing. They're just in the air, and you see that, and you're like, I'm gonna die now. That thing's, but it doesn't. I mean, I think it can. I think because it gives off, I think, like sparks and such, and I think those can harm you. But it's not. It's not purposeful. You just.
Right.
I remember that it was at night, and you see this thing coursing through the sky, and then you have, of course, there's just so much in this game, and it's hard to encapsulate in one episode, which is why I'm trying to kind of focus on just those feelings, right? As I do on this show. But there's so many moments of just wonder, and I love the fact that this game took so many liberties with the formula. You know, there's no Triforce. There's 4 guardians that are basically giant puzzle boxes. The giant guardian dungeons are really these like puzzle boxes that you can transform and manipulate and make this tail go up, and I loved every bit of that.
It's funny too, you mentioned the house. Every time the last couple of times I built it, so I did 2 playthroughs right now of Breath of the Wild so far. My first initial one where I just kind of like played through the game, did whatever, and then the second one, which is the master mode, but I was much more involved in the world of Hyrule when I played it the second time. So when I did that this time, as soon as I got all the weapons from the 4 champions, I immediately did the house subquest, right? Started building the house and everything, got that going, and I put up all those weapons, all the weapons and the shield, because I think you also get a shield with Urbosa's champion's weapon. So I put all of them there. Then I left it alone, went about my business, did all that stuff. And then when it came time to start storming Hyrule Castle, first thing I did, went back to the house. I'd be like, all right, let's gear up. So we geared up. So I geared up, put all the champions' weapons, and be like, all right, let's storm this place with everybody's spirits right by my back. And it just, narratively speaking, that actually felt much more impactful than just saying, okay, let's just go let's just go and raid the castle and see what we can get. But like this time, it's like, okay, this is the final time. Let's go mess things up. Let's go get let's go get the good stuff and just go to town with it, right? So you got the Master Sword, you got Daruk's weapon, you got Mipha's spear, you got Rivali's bow, Urbosa's sword and shield, and just going through that with those weapons, it makes such a statement when you do that, I feel like.
As we conclude and wrap up this journey through the Legend of Zelda franchise, I want to send a very special thank you to the patrons who help make it happen. Many thanks go to Games with Coffee, Patrice Millette, the Let's Play Princess, Greg Seward of the Player One podcast and Generation 16 series of videos, BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Seth Sergil of the All In podcast, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Dan of Retro Logic, Ryan Payne of Gamers Week podcast, and finally, the one and only Pete Harney. If you would like to join these heroes of Hyrule, sign up. Go to patreon.com/agamerlooks40, investigate the tiers, and if something strikes your fancy, by all means, please sign up. We would love to have you. And if you don't want to do that, join our Discord. All the information are in the show notes of this episode. Next up, Blue Williams returns to discuss how she cannot go back to the traditional formula after experiencing Breath of the Wild. And then Moses Norton of the-pixels.com and MageCast discusses some of the changes Breath of the Wild made to the standard Zelda formula. And also I love about Breath of the Wild is it doesn't tell you what to do.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't tutorialize, it doesn't hold your hand, it doesn't give you a quest marker. The most basic quest marker you can get is like where the 4 bosses are, the dungeons.
Right.
Like, I honestly don't know if I could go back to traditional Zelda, like 8 pieces of Triforce and 8 dungeons where you have to get the item from the dungeon and hit the googly monster and the googly eye with the... I don't think I can go back to that. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, I realize that nostalgia runs strong. I realize that it's super cool to hate on Breath of the Wild for the breakable weapons and because it's not a Zelda. It doesn't feel like a Zelda. It's like, okay, yeah, I've heard it all. But I 100% agree with you. The classic Zeldas are genius for the time, but they suffer from the limitations of their era. Breath of the Wild, to me, is Zelda fully realized with all the potential, all the adventure. The story's there if you want it, but if you don't, just go and make your own fun.
If you liked or disliked Breath of the Wild or one of these other games, it doesn't make you more or less a fan. Like sometimes I'll see people say, like, oh, I liked it, so, the real fans like this. And that's just, it's hogwash. It really does depend on who you ask. So that said, I know you're asking me. But I mean, my takeaway of Breath of the Wild, I can appreciate given the scale of it, given the microcosms of its dungeons, its mini dungeons, and the amount of weapons that they wanted to put in the game, the different things you can do with them, that, a survival type mechanic of breakable weapons kind of makes sense there because you're accumulating so many. A lot of people complained about it to make it sound like they ran out of weapons. I never had that problem.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, there's weapons everywhere in this. It's really just the hoarding mentality. So that said, I think that we're getting Breath of the Wild 2. Like it's in the title as far as we know.
Yes.
And it looks like a direct continuation or prequel or whatever. I had said previously I wouldn't want to see breakable weapons become the norm for the Zelda franchise any more than I would have wanted to see the ocean become the norm for the Zelda franchise after Wind Waker.
And now it's time for the hot takes. It's time for us to tackle the big issue, the looming problem, allegedly, with Breath of the Wild breakable weapons. Everybody had an opinion, and if you're somebody who's been following the conversation and the rhetoric and some of the extreme thoughts on this topic, you may be surprised with what my guests actually thought. In order of conversation, Dan from Retro Logic, followed by Games with Coffee, Trevor and Jeff from New Dad Gaming, Seth, Sergil, Blue, and then Julian of Nerds Without Pants all weigh in on this very interesting and highly controversial topic. How do you feel about the most controversial aspect of Breath of the Wild, which is the weapon degradation and item degradation? What's your take on that?
Yeah, and I think in a vacuum as a concept, weapon degradation isn't like preferred. If I find a weapon I like, I want to keep that weapon usually. I think that the motivations for them doing it in Breath of the Wild were pure. They were for the player's benefit to try different things and to not be to constantly be moving and exploring, right? Like, if I had the same weapon all the time and I had like my optimal build all the time, then the risk a little bit kind of goes away, and the need to go out and explore and find bigger enemies with better weapons kind of goes away. So since I think in Breath of the Wild they executed that mechanic the best I've seen, because the whole world is enticing you to go find new stuff. And from the weapon breakage to being able to go anywhere from the get-go to something new being around every corner, it just, yeah, I don't mind it at all in Breath of the Wild. I didn't even know that people were complaining about it until like much later in the Switch's life cycle. I was like, oh, people don't like that? Like, I barely noticed that it was there. I was just accepted it as part of the game. And yeah, it's annoying sometimes, but games by nature have to give you annoying things to throw challenges at you. So, I don't know. Like, I'm not gonna say that it's perfectly executed. There are certainly times where I'm like, man, it would be really nice if even the Master Sword like runs out of energy or whatever,
right?
You know.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But I think in the long run, it's better. It's a better experience in that world to not always have the same gear. So I'm okay with it.
Yeah, and I'm the very rare bird in that I love it.
Okay,
I love it because I am the person in games who naturally gravitates towards hoard all the things. I need 18 mega elixirs for the final boss in Final Fantasy. I don't, to hoard. And it's something that I've been trying to shed in recent years. Like, no, play with the tools. Like, the developers made these things for you to play with. Play with them. Have fun with them. Use weapons in Mega Man and don't just save them for the boss. Like, use them. That's what they're kind of there for. And Breath of the Wild's Destructive forced me to do that. It just forces you to shed that hoarding kind of thing. And I get people who like weapons, you collect them because collecting is empowering and you get cool stuff and loot is fun. But I love the fact that the game just says, no, try it all and trust us. Yeah. You will find something along the way in the area you're at. You'll find something that'll be suitable for the challenge you're taking. Yeah, like, we're not going to completely leave you stranded.
And it's funny because you know, depending on how big your inventory is, whatever direction you went with that, you're probably carrying around some weapons that are like, this is like D tier last ditch effort. Like, I'm never going to use this. And there are scenarios where you might end up having to use it. Like, you're just going to run out of your steel weapons and you're going to have that one stick you've had since the beginning of the game. And now that's all you have. And then you somehow it carries you through.
Yeah,
and that's your favorite stick now, and everybody has stories like that where it's like, you know. And just
that you threw the last item in desperation, and boom, that took care of the last problem.
Yep.
And then you just feel like a golden god. You're just like, yes. So why do you like breakable weapons in Breath of the Wild?
Oh man, it just makes everything so interesting. Like, if you're on the cusp of having a weapon that's broken and you're like, oh man, I gotta panic, I gotta think now, I gotta go back to my Zelda 2 roots and I gotta strategize. And I love that strategy aspect of Breath of the Wild. It's just you have to plan each and every encounter to the T, especially in Master Mode where everything hits harder. Everybody heals if you leave them alone long enough.
Which is nuts.
So you really got to plan out how you're going to use your weapons, how you're going to use the environment around you. And with the fact that everything breaks in this game, it sounds problematic at first, but again, you get so many different weapons in this game. Like, you will never have enough slots to hold all those weapons. You're gonna have duplicates of like a couple weapons in your inventory, and you're probably never gonna use them because you'll have like a certain weapon that you just kind of go back to over and over again, and then you're like, okay, those ones there, those Royal Guard swords, I'm using those as my absolute last resort in case of emergency. I am totally about to get slaughtered by this Lionel. backup.
Yeah.
In case everything goes straight to the toilet. So that's what I love about that.
I love it to go a little bit further. I love the idea that the designers of the game were so confident, and Breath of the Wild is an extraordinarily confident game.
Oh yes,
that's how I like to describe it, because for a number of different reasons I won't get into here. But when it comes to breakable weapons, the designers said, we will always give you something.
Yeah.
And you as the player, and me personally, if I don't have that, I am the inventory guy. I'm the person who will save 18 mega elixirs for the last encounter, and I save, hoard, save, and I never use. I never play.
I feel attacked.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm commiserating. And if you remember, one of the side quests is you can build a house.
Yes, I love the house quest. It's like one of my favorites.
Yeah, the super rad. I went ahead, I built the house, I furnished the house. And the idea of the house is you can store things in there.
Yeah.
You have a couple slots for shields. It's not unlimited. So I first got in, I threw my best weapons in there. If I ever need you, I'm coming back. I never came back. Why? Because the game keeps feeding you everything you need, and it's trusting you. It's saying, please play with this stuff. It's great. I disagree with those who say you should be able to toggle it off or you should be able to repair. No, don't repair it. Let the dumb thing break.
Exactly, right.
What I think Trevor and I have talked about on a past episode is with Breath of the Wild, like specifically, the old school games, you pick up a weapon, you kind of have it. Like maybe there's a number of uses to, bow and arrow or whatever. But with Breath of the Wild, it was like, hey, you have this thing. It destroys itself in a matter of, a certain amount of uses. And that kind of threw you off of this kind of rhythm that you had going. I think that was part of the problem for both of us, where the older games, like once you had a tool or equipment, you can kind of get into the feel of what you needed to do in each puzzle. Whereas Breath of the Wild is like, hey, you don't have that thing anymore. You don't have your favorite sword anymore. Or you don't, your master sword is now not charged up anymore. And you have to kind of be nimble and flexible. And that kind of threw a ripple in there, where I can see some people being turned off by that and other people just like loving it. They're like, yes, this is my jam. This is where I want to see Zelda kind of go and push those boundaries.
Trevor, were you not a fan of the Breath of the Wild breakable weapons?
Oh, I detested it. With a fiery passion. I couldn't stand it. I was telling Jeff, like, if I could find a mod, I would probably want to get back. I never finished it. Just the sheer size of it for me.
You can't say that. You can't say you didn't finish it and be a new dad gaming podcast host. You can't.
What are you talking? That is the absolute dad experience.
Yes, it is.
Dad don't got time for that. So didn't finish it. Partly A, because just the sheer size of it, and then B, like that mechanic just started to become such a point of frustration to have finally grinded these 7 things, like hit those 7 beams, defeat those 4 dragons. Hey, here's a sword. Broken. It's like, what's the point? I'm back to using sticks. Like, what a ridiculous nonsense is this? So that's at some point it becomes personal preference. I did find it really did break for myself, broke the game. It really felt un-Zelda like. It, much like Jeff said, I think there's realms within they can work to be creative, and one of the truths about creativity is like the more restraints you put on it, the more creative you have to be. So that for me becomes interesting for what they could do. But for instance, like the next Zelda, they introduced dialogue trees. Like it'd be super weird. Like, it would feel utterly unfaithful to the canon. And I will say, I felt that the Unbreakable Swords, for instance, felt a bit unreliable to the canon compared to how you usually acquire things. And they are restricted as they should be if they're going to keep this degree of comfort.
Well, I do want to kind of dovetail off something you just mentioned, but before that, I love breakable weapons. I think I might be the only person. I adored it. I love it.
Hooray! And I can't use this anymore.
Here's why. Yeah, and here's why. But the one big thing that it has to come up when you talk about Breath of the Wild, because it's probably the most controversial, is the breakable weapons. And I know I'm going to make this a hot take conversation.
Yeah.
I've probably said this before. I love breakable weapons.
I do too.
Okay, you do. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I love it.
Wow. I've found my brother in arms here. I love it. And it's not like people say, I don't mind it. No. I really, really like it. I think it's thematically awesome. So why do you like it? I'm going to put it to you.
I completely agree. I think it is a fundamental part of the experience because it creates this tension of like having to like scramble around and find like new weapons to add to your repertoire and having to learn like on the fly sometimes how to use them, you know, where this notion of like, no matter how much time I've put in, you're never 1000% comfortable, nor should you be in this world, you know, and like there is a sense of reward when you get the Master Sword in this game. And even that has got something of a durability, like meter to it. Like, I really like the notion of, you know, like this game is not going to give you anything. You're not going to get anything for free. You're not going to have, you know, the all powerful weapon that never breaks. And, you know, like I really like that sort of notion of like the world is actively always against you and you have to learn how to survive in spite of that. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, I'm fighting a bokoblin and I pray to God he's got like one of those clubs on him.
Right.
You know?
Right.
I love that.
I loved it from a thematic perspective, just like you were saying. I love the fact that it makes everything earned. Like you earn every single victory in this game. And for exactly the reason you said, for me, it was almost a gaming turning point. And yes, I'm 40 and I'm still having gaming turning points. Sorry.
Absolutely.
I am. I have always been the hoarder in video games. I've always been the person that shows up to the end of Final Fantasy with 18 mega elixirs and 99, and I've hoarded everything. I've not used it, and then I turn out I'm so over leveled I don't even need anything. And Breath of the Wild's breakable weapons forced me to shed that.
Right.
And say, I'm going to use the tools the designer have created. Use the tools. And it's something since Breath of the Wild I'm actively doing. No longer am I holding on to the most powerful weapons. I'm going to use them when the situation demands and force myself to do that because A, it's fun, and B, the designers of the game made these things for you to use, not hold on like precious relics. And the fact that in Breath of the Wild, no matter what weapon I get, it's either going to A, run up energy if it's the Master Sword, or if it's a legendary, they break too, and you can go and get it repaired, right? Because it's a weapon you got, like a legendary weapon, I guess what they call it. But at the end of the day, I'm going to lose this thing, so why am I holding on to it? Let's use the tools, let's use the stuff in the environment, and it's forced me to accept the non-optimal situation.
Right. Well, and like,
yeah.
Things are special because they're impermanent, right? Like you cannot have you if you just had this permanent all powerful weapon, it would completely remove any sort of, you know, special attachment to it. You know, I like those moments that are created, those little emergent gameplay moments that are created when you're just it's like, dude, like I'm like fighting this horde of like skeleton moblins and I'm picking up their arms to hit them with, you know, like,
yeah,
I would absolutely never trade those moments that are created in that game and that like sigh of relief after you've pulled it off. And that kind of like, oh, I guess I'd better go and do like a shrine or something, try to get like a guardian weapon or something that's going to last me a little bit longer. Like I would not trade any of that tension ever. I think it is crucial to the game, and I really hope that Tears of the Kingdom, I think that, you know, you could kind of have your cake and eat it too. I think they could probably put some sort of system in the game for people who do want to have, you know, like make it difficult or something to create a weapon of more permanence maybe, and maybe they'll do something like that with Tears of the Kingdom, but like absolutely don't take it out. Like I think that is a core part of the game.
I 100% agree. I'm so glad I found somebody, because most people I talk to hate it, and I get it, and I understand why people don't like it, because there is a joy to collecting, right? And a lot of people in my circle and your circle as well. I'm not sure if you're much of a collector. I'm not a collector of anything. I don't collect things. It's not a thing I have in my body. I'm a use and lose. I don't collect things. It's just not a piece of my fabric. So for me, to not feel like I have to do it in this game again is very freeing. It was such a freeing feeling again. But I get why because people like to collect things. You get the awesome weapon because you worked hard to get it, to have it break and now it's gone and all your hard work is quote unquote gone. I can solely see that as this empowering thing. For me, it was the exact opposite where it was like, I'm going to utilize this thing when I need it, understand it's gone, but trust that the game will give me what I need. Or at least if it's not what I want, I'm going to get something I need. I'll have a stick to hit the thing with. And it may not be optimal, but that's okay. I need to accept the non-optimal situation that, hey, the fancy thing broke. Don't be so attached to it. I think that's what for me. Don't be so attached to the fancy thing and the collection in the inventory menu. Use the inventory menu, like use this stuff because it's not going to be here forever.
And you know, like, and look, I understand why people want the permanent weapons and stuff too, but like, you know, I'm sorry guys, I got news for you. Like nothing is permanent. No, you know, no. Like life is just a series of things appearing and disappearing. That's what life is, you know? And so like, I really like that it is making us put this emphasis on something that is impermanent, that nothing gold can stay, you know, that whole notion. Like I love that. And I love that like a simple, again, it goes back to Majora's Mask, like this simple design decision can make us have conversations like this. Just like this simple notion of a weapon breaking or not breaking, this teeny tiny little thing can, you can learn so much about yourself from it, you know?
Absolutely. Again, like I said, it really was truly freeing. I feel the same way about, you know, things, and I'll get into it. This might be a slightly deeper, you know, conversation. Again, Legend of Zelda, you know, breakable weapons causing this kind of conversation. I find a lot of comfort in the idea that in 100 years, everything that surrounds me and I own will be completely gone. That the house will be gone or something else will be in its place. The car will be long rotted away. All this stuff is completely temporary. And after in about 100, 150 years, no one's going to remember who I am. And I think that's actually really good and pure and healthy. Yeah. I actually take a lot of comfort in that. And the reason being is that I don't have to really covet this stuff as much as I, you know, normally would. I'm not perfect. Trust me. I like my things. I like my stuff. Sure. Stuff is good. But to not have to kind of shed that focus and say, this monitor that I'm looking at right now, this thing is built to break. Like it will eventually break. It'll eventually fail. It's eventually going to disappoint me. And if I understand that now, it's going to save me a lot of heartache when it eventually does, because I won't be so attached to it. And so for me, the idea, again, the notion of everything eventually is going to be either gone or replaced by something else, including people's memories of me, is okay. It's like, I'm okay with that. That's fine. Again, not to get too much into a deep thing, but you know, we recently had my wife's father-in-law stepfather-in-law passed away. Right. Or no, sorry. I'm sorry. My stepfather-in-law, my wife's stepfather, passed away a couple weekends ago. Mm-hmm. And whenever people pass, you know, you kind of have to start going through things, and you look through things. And when my wife's mom passed away a few years ago, we inherited all her stuff, and she has thousands of pictures and hundreds of just so much stuff, that several containers of the stuff, just tons of stuff. And we would go through it, and my wife would go through it, and we threw out so much stuff. And people would ask, like, oh, what do you want to keep? And this kind of, I'll get back to my wife's stepfather. Through the process of us going through all that stuff, there were pictures of people in there. We had no idea who they were. Right now, my mother-in-law kept that stuff for a reason, but for us, we're so abstracted. My wife just scanned them into the computer and tossed it. And we threw out so much stuff. And people would ask, like, why did you throw out all that stuff? It's like, we don't have the connection, and we don't really need that stuff to remember her mom. Mm-hmm. So when she went to Iowa last week to go through some of his stuff to the funeral and then go through some of his stuff, people were asking her left and right, hey, do you want this? Do you want that? She's like, I really don't. I don't just don't need it. We've done a good job of kind of shedding ourselves of that, where we can just hold on to a memory and not have the stuff to remember it. So all the way back to breakable weapons, it's a similar vibe for me. It's a freeing thing. I don't need it, and I don't know how I got to that story from there, but
no,
again,
look, I love that we can look at this so deeply. I absolutely love that we can have conversations like these about something, because like you said, like these things are built to break, and guess what? So are we. Yeah, we're built to break. Right. Like we put an undue amount of vanity on ourselves because we're humans and we're inherently vain. Yep. And we put all of this huge importance on things like this, but yeah, at the end of the day, like we all break and we're all going to die. We're all going to go away. And we're, those memories that we're leaving with other people are important, but like there's going to come a time where nobody is going to know that we ever existed.
And that's a good thing. I think, honestly, I think that's okay. That's fine. Yeah. People say, how do you want to, do you want to be cremated or buried? What do you want your like remains? I'm like, I don't care. I don't know.
Same exact way.
I don't know. Throw me in a dumpster. I'm not going to be there. So don't worry about it. As cheap as possible, whatever the cheapest option is,
whatever is the least burden,
Yes, whatever is the least burdensome, and I will make a decision so you don't have to burden with that decision. I'll say, I'll do something goofy, and don't worry about it. It's fine. It's all okay.
I agree.
Lack of permanence is a good thing, and again, going back to breakable weapons,
funny. I love
that. It is pretty good, man. But it does, of course, have its controversy. What's your opinion on breakable weapons?
They don't bother me one bit. It affects the strategy. It affects how you play. I guess if you play to me, if you play action RPGs, you should be used to monitoring about a dozen things at once. Whether it's multiple characters, whether it's like your MP or your HP or your overbreak limit or whatever. Here, it's just breakable weapons. Yeah. I am not really sure. I don't really understand why people hate them as much as they do. It makes you think. It makes you pay attention. You can't just wail on something forever and just keep pressing A. But I don't know.
Can I internet high five you?
Okay.
Boom. Boom. I 100% agree.
Thank you. Thank you.
I like them. I'll go as far as say I really enjoy them. I find them extremely freeing.
Adapt, improvise,
Guess
overcome.
What? There you Exactly. Guess what you're using as this enemy, and you have to be okay with that.
Right.
Like, okay, well, I'm going to have to be just a little more nimble, a little more. And if I lose, well, I lose. Yeah. And you die a lot in Breath of the Wild. It's okay.
That's like the same criticism that people who don't like Mario Kart have. It's like, well, people keep hitting me with stuff. I was like, yeah, deal with it. Mm-hmm. Keep racing and deal with it.
That's it. Accept that life is not fair sometimes. Right. And move on and get them back next time.
How do you deal with adversity?
Exactly. Throw a Koopa shell at it and hopefully things work out.
So I don't mind the concept of breakable weapons. I'm not a fan of how often a lot of them break in Breath of the Wild. But one thing that it did well was that it forced me to use weapons that I normally wouldn't use. Because I'm a sword dude. I love swords. Going back to, if everybody remembers like 8-bit theater, like I like swords. Like me. So having to like be like, oh, now I have to use a spear, or now I have to use a hammer, getting me out of my comfort zone that was a really cool thing that it did. Because they all have different movesets and stuff like that. But
sure,
I just wanted it tweaked just a little bit, really. And I also felt that like the combat itself needed to be more revolutionary, considering that everything else was so revolutionary. Like it still felt like Zelda combat. There was still like a lot of like Zelda 64 DNA in there to me. And I was like, okay, like this is fine, capital F fine. But
it hasn't evolved. And
yes.
It's for me that combat does feel like a
like a warm sweater, you know, just it's cozy and it's very simple. That's probably one of the weakest parts of the game is actually fighting things.
Yes.
You know.
But that exploration is top notch. Like
it's best in class.
Yes.
It is best in class exploration.
Yes.
Anyway.
And finally, Dan from Retro Logic comes back to talk about how you're never quite done with Breath of the Wild and discuss the Master Quest. Blue Williams returns to share her opinions on what puts Breath of the Wild above every other Zelda game made. Phoebe, also known as the Let's Play Princess, joins the show to talk about where she thinks the series can go moving forward. And then finally, Seth and I return one more time to talk about the game as a whole and what we think can happen in the future.
Because again, I say with Breath of the Wild, unless you're 100%ing it, you never really, you don't like complete Breath of the Wild. You're just done. You're done with it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I'm sure if I jumped in now, I'd find new things. But
of course. So I got to a point. I get to a point. I was like about 100 hours in, and I'm like, you know what? I've had enough. Let's finish the game. I'm good. And I'm on my way back to take on Ganon. And all of a sudden I see like in the distance, as you do, like a little smoke coming up from a place. I'm like, what the hell? What's over there? I walk over there and complete town I completely missed with side quests and characters. It was a little beach town with the little beachy island town.
Oh yeah.
I totally missed it. And there was another 5 hours in beach town looking for whatever thing the person asked me to do. It's such a joy. And it's just a joyful game.
Did you do any Master Quest stuff?
No, as soon as I finished it, I punched out and that was
someday you're going to fire up Master Quest and it totally changes how you play the game.
Oh man.
I am the kind of person, I'm the shotgun user. I'm guns blazing. Like, I don't want to sneak around. I want to get in your face and blow your head off. That's the kind of gamer I am.
Cool.
I'm not a sniper. You know, I get sniped. That's who I am. And the master mode forces you to chill the hell out because like some of the things they did is they raised the level of every enemy by 1. Their health regenerates, and they added camps all over the place.
Oh no!
So, it became a situation where I used to be able to run in guns blazing. Now I'm being very, very particular and tactical about what I do, what I use, when I go in. So it totally changed how I played the game, and I loved it. I loved every second of that.
That's very cool. That sounds actually really neat. I'm the exact opposite. I love sneaking and
so you might like Master
sniping.
Mode more.
It's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing. If you had to kind of put a pin in one aspect of Breath of the Wild that makes it sing as opposed to just be great, like something that puts it over the top to masterclass in video gaming, what do you think that would be for you?
The potential of it.
Ooh, okay.
Just because, like I already said, open world games I love. They're my favorite. Like I love Ghost of Tsushima. I love Assassin's Creed. Give me a big open map and let me go and don't bother me. And I'm going to play it how I want to play it. Now, and I think that Breath of the Wild does that better than most. Like a lot of the criticisms of like, let's say an Assassin's Creed Odyssey is like, yeah, it's a big open world map, but it's cookie cuttered and it's busy work in between. And a lot of the stuff is just cloned and like there's nothing meaningful in it, even though it's big and open. I don't feel that way with Breath of the Wild. I think everywhere you go, there's something interesting to find, interesting to explore, interesting to interact with. I think that not only did they, it's not an example of quantity over quality, it's both, in my opinion.
where do you think this series goes? Or more importantly, where would you like it to go?
So, personally, I would enjoy it if it went back to its roots, to the more isometric, but again, that's just me. In all honesty, though, I think that there is a spot for all forms of Zelda. I think that the more open world adventure-y crafting style that Breath of the Wild has started can continue and probably will continue past Tears of the Kingdom, or maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be its own separate timeline, or however that works. Somebody actually pointed that out to me, if I can speak about that.
Go for it.
I want to say a roommate said it, a theory that wasn't Breath of the Wild's cover either a lot more red or a lot more green compared to normal?
I don't remember.
The newest, I want to say Tears of the Kingdom has a very green thing going on. Some of the trailers are a lot more green and stuff. And primarily blue, green, and red have been major colors in the Zelda timeline, or all the different games. You have red being power, green meaning courage, and blue meaning wisdom. So their theory is that the Breath of the Wild timeline or series will actually be a trilogy.
Ooh.
And each game will, in fact, be connected to one of those colors.
That's a cool thought. It's a very cool thought. Yeah, imagine that.
But I definitely feel that at the end of the day, they'll still be making the more classic Zeldas, and they'll make more 3D Zeldas. I think there's a place for both styles.
So, any kind of other kind of final thoughts on Breath of the Wild? Let's just go to the wrap up. So, because the episode itself is going to be kind of Breath of the Wild and forward. So the way I'd like to frame this is, I think you and I, of all the people I've interviewed for this show, I think you've been on it the most probably. And there's some people that were on early on that I haven't been able to connect with later on, and some new people come in. And I'm truly grateful for everybody who took the smallest amount of time to talk to me about their memories of this game and this series, because be perfectly honest, this show lives and dies off of the stories of other people. That's what this show does. It's what this is. It's the engine that makes this thing run. So when I frame it this way, I'm not trying to diminish other people's contributions, but I will say that of everybody I've had the pleasure of discussing this game with and this series with, you have, I think, offered a lot of yourself in these conversations, and offered a lot of your history and personal things, and just really have connected with the series in a very intense and personal way that I think a lot of people have to a certain extent, but you have shared it a lot. I feel like I've gone on this journey with you.
I agree.
To the point where I look at the Breath of the Wild episode, I'm like, I have to have a Seth thing in here because it doesn't feel right without it. And there's a couple episodes that you're not on that feel a little less than, but so what I want to do is really kind of give you and I kind of the last word on this series, like the last word on it, kind of close it off, tie it up with kind of the two of us chatting through it. First thing really is, where do you think this series goes from here? We have Tears of the Kingdom coming up pretty soon as of this recording. If Breath of the Wild taught us anything, we have no idea what to expect.
Yes.
Right. And so where do you think this series goes? Do you think we're going to stay in the Breath of the Wild mode? Do you think there are other avenues for exploring the Legend of Zelda? I mean, we've been talking about it for 6 months. This series can go in 1,000 different directions. Where do you see this going in the future?
Yeah, it's funny, and I apologize to anybody who might think of this as a cop-out answer, but my answer is I don't know. And I think that it's kind of beautiful that I don't even have an inkling in my head, nor do I want to. I don't want to be able to predict where Zelda is going next, because the relationship that I have with Zelda, and it's also, I am right there with you. I feel like I've been on this journey, and I really appreciate you for providing me this show as a platform to express my love and connection with this series, because it isn't something, despite the fact that I make almost exclusively Nintendo content on the internet, it is true. I have not sort of hitched my horse. I could be like a Zelda specific YouTuber, podcaster, whatever, but I haven't like hitched my horse to the Zelda wagon, despite the fact that Zelda is incredibly important to me. It's one of the most singularly important things in my entire life. I would be a different person if I never played The Legend of Zelda. But I don't often get a chance to elaborate on that, nor have these sort of deep philosophical discussions that you and I have enjoyed on this show. So I do really, really appreciate the opportunity to explore that, and to sort of, let my Zelda flag fly, so to speak. But one of my favorite things about it is this sort of, being introduced to this series so young and feeling an attachment to it so young and feeling like a deep personal connection to it. I am along for the ride for whatever it is they do, and I kind of like not knowing what they're going to do next. I kind of, my gut reaction when they first announced the sequel to Breath of the Wild, which would become Tears of the Kingdom, was actually to be disappointed. And my first kind of reaction to it was, I was kind of hoping they would do something completely new. And now that time has gone on and we've, gotten these little breadcrumbs and we know like a little bit more about it, it seems like it is going to be quite different from Breath of the Wild. But I love that with almost every new entry, we're getting entirely new timelines, entirely new worlds, entirely new characters. We have these mainstays. We have these points of comfort, these things that we can sort of tether ourselves to as Zelda fans. But I love not knowing. I love that you can have a sequel to a legendary, franchise and not know exactly what it is you're going to get. Even when you have a sequel to what has now become one of the most like known quantity Nintendo games of all time, between sales, between critical reception, Breath of the Wild, we know every inch of that game. But Tears of the Kingdom still, despite being a sequel to that game and its world, has surprises waiting for us. And that feeling of not knowing, my inability to answer that question is why I love it.
I totally agree. And to kind of just expand on that a little bit, not to sound cheesy, but again, it harkens back to the very first game where the Zelda is really good at allowing you to discover what's on the next screen, right? Mm-hmm. What's coming up and surprising you with what's there. Yes. And, I remember the first time I played Legend of Zelda, when I ran into the graveyard, I'd never seen anything like that. In Mario Brothers, you start on the snow level and you end in the snow level. You don't start on snow and all of a sudden it turns into a desert. Like, it doesn't happen. Right. And in Zelda, the first Zelda, it does that. And in Breath of the Wild, I'm still experiencing that. I'm still wandering along. Oh, there's a Coliseum. What's in there? Oh, a Lionel. I'm dead now. But that's like, that's constant set of discovery. And I think in my experience with this series and going through this has been how connected the games are in terms of theme and in terms of play and in terms of its core, which is that discovery, which is that sense of adventure. That through line is in every single game. I can't think of one that doesn't have at least a piece of that. Even if it's not as expansive as Breath of the Wild or Link to the Past, it still has that. Zelda will always surprise you. Yeah, and I think that's a really beautiful thing.
The word that you just used is exactly the word I was going to use in adventure. Zelda is the ultimate adventure story, the ultimate sense of adventure. When I think about what the Zelda franchise has meant to me, and I think the number one thing that Zelda has sort of meant to me over the course of my life playing these games has been the sense of adventure, is go beyond the screen. You know, it's dangerous to go alone. Take this, you know, it is dangerous, but you have this stuff and you shouldn't be scared. You have these tools at your disposal. There's something new always waiting. And like, that's something that I don't think I would have discovered, at least not as, you know, at the point of my life that I did, had it not been for this series. And like, I think that is an incredibly important thing for us to learn as humans. You know, if it's something as profound as the adventure that we go on, you know, internally as humans, like we have in Majora's Mask, if it's even some kind of like weird internalization adventure that we have with breakable weapons in Breath of the Wild, right. You know, like all of this stuff is a collection of adventures and the adventurous spirit that these games instill in us and the lens that it holds up to us as people. And it's breathtaking and it means a great deal to me.
That, as they say, is that. Thank you so much to everybody who clicked on even one of the 7 months worth of Zelda we have been embarking on over the last year and change. It's been an amazing ride. It's a body of work I'm genuinely proud of, and it could not have happened without the support, insights, conversations, thoughts, and memories of every single person who I've been lucky enough to interview for this show. Coming up next on A Gamer Looks at 40, we're going to have a series of one-on-one interviews that I think will be enlightening and interesting. And then we'll see. Maybe in a few months we'll do something else. Who knows? Who knows? But until that time comes, thank you so much for checking out A Gamer Looks at 40. And until next time, keep an eye on those crystals. You never know when they will go dark.